welcome everybody. I'm looking forward to a great meeting here tonight. We're going to learn how to fill out real estate contracts. We're going to start with a down and dirty one-page one, take you through exactly how to do it step by step, and we're going to end with the full-blown realtor contract. It's going to be a great meeting. Just a couple announcements. First of all, as you can see from our slides, we are full blown in 2021 with our new programs. We are rolling them out fast and furious. For those of you new members may not know this, but for those of you who have been around a while, now in our old format, we could not do these things. These are the new programs that we could not do before. So if you've heard a bunch of nonsense about the TREIA and changing of entities, this is why. We have a mentorship program. And by the way, we'll run these slides again at the end in case you want to get any of this information. But Lionel Finley is heading up. So if you're interested in having a mentor or being a mentor, get in touch with Lionel. TREIA Brain Trust, if you are an experienced member and want to get some special opportunities, become a leader, help others, sign up for the TREIA Brain Trust. We have a rehab tour coming up February 20th. And let me tell you what, we just put this together. We have not really even started advertising it yet. And it is filling up really quickly. It's limited to 50 people. And even the first night we rolled it out, we already had like 10. So it's filling up very quickly. We are seeking a vendor member coordinator to help run our vendor program. That's a paid position if you know anyone who's interested. Also, we are looking for vendors. So if you all will think for us, if you did your last rehab and you have a painter that you really liked, or anyone that you think could be, Lionel's here, could be a good vendor for us, send us their contact information. We would love to get hold of them, and we'd love to have them become a vendor member. That's one of our goals, is to really build that program this year. And finally, prep. Welcome to the first prep class. What is prep? Practical real estate projects. It comes in two forms, virtual and in person. This is the first prep virtual meeting where we are going to take a series of tasks and teach you how to do it step by step, granular. And we are going to be seeking your opinion and advice on what topics you'd like to hear about. So we're kicking it off with how to fill out a real estate purchase contract, and then we're going to be looking for some suggestions from you. We do have a short list to get started, but we're looking for ideas. And then prep in person, as prep wholesale is a $500 tuition, and that is you will actually, the class will do a wholesale deal, get a house under contract and flip the contract. And then prep rehab, this is our second time. We did a prep rehab and the class actually bought a house, rehabbed it, sold it, and made over $50,000. And they learned just firsthand how to do it. So prep in person is all about how to learn doing things hands-on, in person, real life, and prep virtual is all about learning basic things step by step. So just to introduce you to the board members we have on here tonight, we have Karen Lewis, we have Jackie Richards, we have Leslie Ortiz, who's going to tell you about our upcoming meetings, and then our special guest tonight, who is going to teach you about, oh, sorry, and I think we have Lionel Richie now. Oh my God.
We have Lionel Richie. Yes, we do.
Lionel Richie.
Serenade you like you would not believe. Guess what, Lionel, you're singing.
We have Lionel Finley, board member. I'm trying to find here. Make him a co-host.
Look at his face. That's good. Can we take a screenshot of that, please? That was good. We need to make him co-host there, Kathy.
Please don't. All right, I just found him. So we have Lionel. Lionel is going to be presenting tonight. I'm going to start with a down and dirty, one-page, simplest contract you could ever use. Lionel's going to come in next with a sort of middle of the road contract, and then Tip is going to take us home with the complicated, really full-blown realtors contract. So Tip is our special guest tonight, and thank you, Tip, so much for being here.
Yay.
I'm going to let Leslie tell you what we have upcoming. I'll ask Jackie and Karen if they have anything to share, and then we'll get right into it.
Okay, I guess that's me. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining in as usual. Great to see everybody's mostly smiley faces.
Turn on your cameras.
We got to turn on cameras, people, because, hey, we're creeping up there to when we're going to be able to do in person. And if people aren't used to seeing your face on Zoom. They're not going to know who you are when you walk into the meeting. So let's maybe try and
And not
everybody.
only that, but if you don't have your cameras on, you can't get in that little picture to win 10 TREIA books, which, by the way, I can't believe anybody didn't win tonight, because there was a bunch of you on those pictures.
Well, was anybody paying attention?
That you got to pay attention. You got to be on time. You got to pay attention. You got to have your camera on, because a bunch of you could have won 10 TREIA bucks today and nobody did. And by the way, when during this meeting, I changed the pictures for next time. You can't win at the end when I play the slides. 2 people did that to me last time. Only at the beginning.
Nice try.
Sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
Nice try. Yeah, no, it doesn't work that way, people. You got to be paying attention at the beginning. Thank you. Anyway, of course, on our TREIA calendar for the rest of the month for January, next week we have Monday night, we've got TREIA West, which is with our own Roxana, and she's got a guy that is heavily involved. Mind you, he's out of Florida, but this can apply anywhere in the country, as he wholesales raw land using trusts. Now, Florida might be a little bit different setup, but it's totally possible in North Carolina. It's just set up a little bit differently. We're going to explain that to you so you don't do things wrongly. But it's another tool for your tool belt. It's like if you stumble across a couple acres or something, hey, you need to monetize everything that you can. So that would be Monday night with Roxanne. And then Thursday, we've got our second daytime meeting in WIRE, Women in Real Estate. Women, you need to be there. And Audrea for this month has got Ingrid Ruiz coming. Ingrid is a TREIA member for a long time. She's a certified appraiser, and she's going to go over what I wouldn't say opinion, but what is actually showing up as to be very popular and best bang for your buck when you're rehabbing, what appraisers the things you really should think about spending the money on, and not so much on the other stuff. So this is a very informative, and Ingrid is she's really good speaker. So y'all need to come on next Thursday for WIRE. And then of course, Kathy's just thrown it out there for our Unbus tour. So if you're interested, get signed up early, because we're going to fill it fast, and it's going to be really cool. And they're throwing me in the middle of it, so you're going to be able to see my monster rehab on that. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but hey. So come on and see what's going on out there. So that is it. Where are we going now, Kathy?
All right. Does Karen or Jackie, anything you need to add?
No, I don't think so.
Just, guys, let me know. You should be getting emails from me that will come from the TREIA publicity. If you're not getting the week at a glance, I've had a couple of people reach out, then send an email to TREIApublicity@gmail.com and make sure that I've got your right email address. And also, I know you're not spamming me and putting me in the little spam folder, but check that folder too. That's it. Happy New Year, everyone. Learn
All
some.
right, then we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to go over this little one-page contract, then we're going to kick it over to Lionel, and then we're going to kick it over to Tip. So, let's see. Can you all see my screen there? Okay, this is what I call one-page down and dirty contract. Now, let me tell you a few things about this. First of all, everybody thinks you have to have a long, complicated contract. You do not. In order to have a valid contract to purchase real estate in North Carolina, you need 4 things. You need a sum certain, well, that means an amount. You need a way to identify the property, an address or a legal description. You need the names of the parties, and you need signatures. If you have those 4 things, you have a valid binding contract. We were talking about this before the meeting, and Tip said, yeah, you can scratch a contract on a napkin and it's valid. That's true. It is. Now, I have used this. You are not going to ever use this contract if you have a realtor involved. But you can use it for anything else, really. Just used it. I sold an office condo with $285,000. The buyer asked me to do the contract, which, you know, you're the buyer, you should do the contract, but whatever. So I sent him this all filled out. He took it to his bank. He came back and said, my bank said, you know, this doesn't look like the right contract. So could you do a better one or a longer one? And I'm like, no. I said, that's a valid contract. If you want to do a longer or better contract, send it to me. I'll be happy to sign it. But sure enough, this contract turned out to be fine and we closed on it. So I'm going to show you 3 variations of this, but they're very similar. First of all, let's talk about assignability of contracts. This is for all you wholesalers. If you're going to get a property under contract and wholesale it, you need to make sure your contract is assignable. Well, what is the law in North Carolina? In North Carolina, a contract is assignable unless it says it's not. So technically this contract would be assignable. However, I do recommend, I'm a lawyer and I like to be no ends left untied. So I always do recommend, if you're going to use this as a wholesaler, that you're going to put in here after buyer or assigns. And by the way, I will send these contracts to everyone who's in the meeting, this contract, and I'll see if Lionel will let me send his as well. And I don't think we'll need to send tips because you'll get that one from your realtor. But so you'll have this if you want to use it. All right. So I'm just going to take this or signs out for now, but we're going to talk about how do you fill this out? All right. Be it known, the undersigned buyer. Okay. And this contract, I'm going to see who I can see first on my screen. Kevin Leonard is going to be my buyer. So here we're going to fill in Kevin Leonard and offers to purchase from seller. Next on my list that I can see is Jim Stotler. So Jim Stotler is going to be my seller. So offers to purchase from Jim Stotler. Real estate known as 123 Brown Street. Durham, NC. And of course, that's in Durham County. See how simple this one is? Okay. The purchase price offered is going to be $150,000. So $140,000 right there. They're going to make a deposit of $1,000. Put your deposit in right there. Well, what does that mean? Balance due at closing? Well, purchase price is $140,000. They're putting down $1,000. That means they're going to have $139,000 at closing, right? Pretty simple. So the total purchase price, $140,000. All right. This offer is subject to home inspection. You know, if you're buying as is, just take that out. Depending on, what kind of a deal you've made here. And then this is just a standard little title clause. The seller will pass good title, basically. You do want that in there because if you don't want you to be in breach by not closing because there's a lien on the property. And then you have closing date occur on or about February 3rd. That's just my birthday, so I'm just putting that in, but please don't bring me a closing on my birthday. And of course, this contract has our office typed in, but you change that to your closing attorney, however you want. Buyer and seller each pay normal closing costs, and that the seller will provide access to buyer upon acceptance. Boom, buyer, seller, sign it, done. That's your contract. Now, so that's just a very simple contract, but we can use this for 2 other purposes, which are, let's see. I have to stop my screen share and start it again to do this, to bring this other one up. Okay, so here's the second version I was going to show you. Whoops, no, that's the same one I just did.
No.
Let's try this one. What the hell? I populated all my contracts. All right. Well, I'll just change it for you right here. All right. Again, so we're going to talk about it if you're a wholesaler. If you're going to use this as a wholesale contract, the first thing I would do is add here or assigns. Again, it's assignable by law, but better to be upfront about it. And then I'm going to add a clause here, which says something like buyer shall have a period of however many days you want, 90, 120, whatever you wholesalers do, in which to inspect the property. If buyer deems the property for any reason not acceptable for buyer's purposes, buyer shall receive earnest money refund. Okay, that's your wholesale. Okay, so if you're a wholesaler, what you want here is you want time to really, it says an inspection, but what you're really doing, right, is going out and find someone to buy your contract. So if you're a wholesaler, you put in over how many days you think you're going to need to go flip this contract, and then you get your earnest money back. If you aren't able to flip it, you can walk away. You don't have to buy it. So that is the wholesaler version. Okay. Now I'll give you one more iteration and then I'm going to be done with this. If you are buying subject to, this is a great contract for subject to, and all you have to do is one simple little change. We're going to go right back up here where we talked about our amounts. The purchase price is $140, paying a deposit of $1,000. The balance due at closing is $139, and you're going to write here, subject to the existing mortgage. Okay, so when you're doing a subject to contract, you can use any contract. You can use this contract. You can use the one Lyle's going to tell you about. You can use the one Tip's going to tell you about, although I don't know why you would for a sub to, but you can. All you have to do is modify that contract in one little way, which is right here. Subject to the existing mortgage. You got to make sure you have that language in there, and boom, you've just created a subject to contract. Okay, so I will send you all three versions of that little thing so you can have them, and we'll see if Lionel wants to include his. So after the meeting, and don't email me if you don't have it 5 minutes after the meeting. It might take me an hour or two. Last time we said we'd send something out, we started getting emails like as soon as we signed off. So we'll get it to you. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and we're going to answer questions at the end. I didn't see any questions specifically come through. Wait, I do have one. So Victoria Green has asked, does the offer not need an expiration date? Sure, you can add an expiration date. It does not have to have an expiration date, but you can add an expiration date. I work with a lot of investors, and sometimes their deals take a long time for one reason or another. So they often don't use an expiration date in their contracts, but you absolutely can. You absolutely do not need to if you don't want to. So that is the down and dirty contract. Again, questions in the chat, and we'll ask Lyle his questions at the end of his, and we'll ask Tip at the end of his. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, Lyle. Lionel, geez, what does with me in your name tonight?
It's no big deal. It's all good. But everybody good to go? Everybody can see this? I'm sure we sharing the screen. So I'll go through this, and what you'll see is I love Kathy's contracts because it's just simple, right? Kids, keep it simple, stupid. That's what I like. I like to keep it simple. But this one here is this is two-page. This is a two-pager. I know a couple folks on here probably recognize this one, and this is what I use. I use this mainly for wholesaling. I use this for when I'm dealing with sellers, but I do not use this for the MLS. Of course, Tip will go over that with you, but and you will also see too, we may have some realtors on here, but I've used this contract also properties that I have sent out that I'm marketing, that sometimes a realtor will have a buyer that will want to make an offer on a property, right? And I typically use this contract and they want to use the MLS, which me personally, I like to keep it simple. I don't like to complicate it with an MLS contract. And I say, hey, look, my property's off market. This is what I use. And so a lot of them have a little heartburn with it because they're not used to like some of the language that they're used to, that it's not actually in here, but it's my property. It's what I like to use. And if they don't want it, then they can move on. Right. So I like to keep it simple. But we'll go through this. Some of the things that you'll see that I probably will not cover just because I know it's in that 13-page monster that that Tip's going to go over, so I don't want to be redundant. But we'll go ahead and get started. And like Kathy said, I'll send this out to Kathy. This one here is a deal that I did with another gentleman. Like you'll see Transform Custom Homes. The actual name of my company is Fortified Solutions. So he and I will do some JVs at time. And this was a actual wholesale deal. So I do JVs as a wholesale. I've done quite a few here in the past year. I have a gentleman that sent properties to me, then I evaluate them and we split them. So I mainly use this, like I said, for wholesales. All right, so pretty simple. As you'll see, there's some a little bit more language in here. But if you look at like what Kathy just went through, believe it or not, this is almost the same, just that there's a little bit more verbiage in here. But to me, not that big of a difference. All right, so of course we got our standard information here, buyer, seller, those folks that are going to be a part in this transaction. I've done deals where I've had 6 people sign on that page too, right? So, and I've had multiple companies up here as buyers because they're doing joint ventures. But it's up to them. It's up to you. Like I said, once again, contracts you use. But this is what I like to use. Of course, property. You'll see this one here was located in Durham. I don't typically fill out every little line on my contracts because it's just not that I'm lazy. It's just that the attorney, believe it or not, is going to research a lot of this stuff anyways. But I just keep it simple and I just keep it moving on these. So same thing with the deed to be determined. Typically, it's going to be the buyer, right? So, and a time and place as far as closing, same thing with the buyer. So the title, their deed, all that stuff's going to be made out to the buyer. But the key, which I want you to see here, is that the deed is made to be determined and or assigns. Because like I said, this contract will be assigned. Sometimes you'll see a separate assignment contract. But this here, to be almost, when I use it, I'm assigned this contract to whoever I'm going to wholesale this property to. All right, personal property. Like I said, Tip's going to cover that, but typically any personal properties in that property. So purchase price, earnest money, the same. What you will see this different on this contract versus what Tip's going to cover here in a minute is there's no due diligence on here. So just realize this contract, and when you get it, you can change it however you want. Just realize that I do contracts or whatever to my favor, right? So on this one here, like if I'm buying a property from someone, I typically will not like have any due diligence on here because I want this in my favor. Now, if they balk at it and they say, hey, we want you to put due diligence on here, then okay, fine, I can put due diligence on there. But typically, I want this to be in my favor, which is why, and you'll hear Kathy say, always hire your own attorneys, right? So I typically want this to be in my favor. So I typically don't put any due diligence on here, but I will have an extended, closing time on it. But it's just what, so one less thing is I don't want to have to put up a bunch of money. But being at the market that we're in now, it probably is not as viable, right? So so it just depends. Like a lot of my deals now, I'll get from wholesalers. I'll also get deals from the MLS because I'll add value to them. You'll hear folks say you can't really find good deals on the MLS, right? But to me, I find good deals on the MLS, but I add value to them. But like I said, I do these contracts in my favor is what I typically do. And if the other person wants to make changes to it, we can agree and then we just keep it moving. But that's typically how I do it. All right, keep going down. And like I said, it's up to you. You can change this however you want, but this is how I do it. Same thing, so I want them to also have of course, a commitment. If I have someone that's actually buying this property from me, I want them to have a commitment. And then you'll see down here, and probably cover that a little bit here later. Typically you're going to get a general warranty deed. And of course, Kathy being our attorney, she can go through all the different types of deeds you can have on a property. But most of the time, it's going to be a general warranty deed. Now, highlighted, the buyer has the right to negotiate with the seller because, once again, on any contract, you can definitely do that. Now, these days, it's a matter of you're typically not going to be negotiating much. And if you do, it's going to be someone else that's probably going to get that property from up underneath you, because you're going to have multiple offers now and on these contracts. So it's not typically one of those things where you're going to be negotiating for the most part, but that will happen. Special assessments, Tip's going to cover a little bit of this, but I'll also get into it. This here, especially special assessment, just depends on, and it happens a lot in HOAs. When you're buying a property, it's some of the things that you're going to have to research yourself, because it's not something that a seller may volunteer, right? So even though it's on here and it says that, if I were you, I would not take it upon listening to the seller, because there could be a 5,000 or 10,000 assessment out there, especially if you're dealing with townhouses for a roof. So those are some of the things that you need to know, right? And it may not be an assessment that's in a month. It may be a 6-month assessment. And if you're in a property or townhouse for 6 months, then that's probably one thing you need to address yourself. But just realize it's something that's down the road, because you may flip a townhouse in 5 months and then assessment in 6 months. It may take you 2 months to sell it. Right now, you just got hit with a $5,000 or $10,000 assessment. So make sure you research all those things yourself and don't pay attention to what the seller tells you, because you could get stuck with a hefty bill if you don't do the research yourself. So I highlight it as is, because even though folks can negotiate, and once Tip goes over that 13-pager, it also, believe it or not, says it on it too, that people, when they buy properties, they're buying an as is condition, even though we can negotiate, but it's as is. So the buyer has the right to back out if they want, that's fine. But typically as an as is, and as investors, you always hear Leslie say there's certain properties that we like to gravitate towards. So we're buying properties with foundation issues. We're buying fire damage. We're buying mold properties. So those are typically things as investors that we're going to buy anyway. So, for us as is, it's not a big deal. It's something that we're going to fix. But just be aware that you could be dealing with some folks that they're going to want a nickel and dime you for every little thing. And it's like, no, I'm not doing it. This is, take it as is, or just move on, right? I'm going to skip the proration adjustments, but typically, once again, association dues, taxes, and it's where you run into here. Closing expenses. These days, I'm not paying anyone's closing expenses, but that's when you see here. If you want to do that, then that's fine. But once again, you could change this contract around, and I will tell you that in 2012 and 13, I was actually paying the seller's closing costs, right? So, and I would just change this out here. Now I would not pay the closing costs. It just depends on you, but I was actually paying their closing costs just to get the deal and close out the deal. But like I said, you can change this around any way you want to suit you, to suit the seller, buyer, whatever, whomever you're dealing with. All right, of course, title insurance, labor material. You can read, I'm not gonna read this whole thing to you here, but the main thing is, as far as labor material, and you'll see here, if furnished to the property within 120 days prior to date of closing, have been paid for and agreed to indemnify the buyer against all loss. Piece of water here. Cause of claim rising referendum. So like I said, you can change for any way you want. Just make sure this is written. I hate to keep saying written towards your benefit, because it's not like you're trying to get over, but once again, they need to have their own attorney, because you want to make sure things are going to benefit you as the individual. So tailor contracts the way you want, but make sure they're in your favor. They need to hire their attorney to say, okay, nope, I want to change this, I want to change that, but it's up to them. It's not up to you to make sure if you're the buyer is looking out for the seller, that they need to have their own attorney involved into it. Property inspections. So I would tell you, for me, being I'm a general contractor, I typically don't pay for property inspections, but I would tell you as an investor, and especially if you're starting out, to always have property inspections. It's going to help you. It's going to cover you. And I will not tell you that it's not that I don't always do them, because there are some properties where I will, especially if I have a major foundation issue or something like that, I'll get an inspection done. But for the most part, always have property inspections done on your properties. If you're paying a company to do it, if you're a GC or something like that is doing, but it's going to help cover you, because not only does it cover you, it helps you with your costs. So you have to know your costs going into this, especially if you're dealing with a hard money lender and folks like that, or even the private lenders. You want the things that are going to be those big ticket items that come back and bite you in the butt. And like I said, foundations, especially if you're doing a basement property, all those type of things. And you wouldn't believe too, of course, in the attic, when you're dealing with insulation, you're going to have some of this old insulation I'm dealing with right now in Franklinton. So those are things as investors that you need to look out for, because they're big ticket items. Because not only will you have to move that asbestos, it has to go to a special landfill. So just realize those are things that can come and bite you in the butt. But like I said, make sure these are things that you have written into your contract, because if not, it can hurt you in the long run. With destroying insects, of course, termites. We live in North Carolina, a lot of moisture. But make sure you're doing that and that's covered. Reasonable access. So one of the things I do is I don't like to go out to properties all the time. So of course I just put a lockbox on it and give them the code. It's up to them and they can go in. Some people now you'll see they're doing videos and all kind of different things, especially with COVID. So it's up to you, but I would say put a lockbox on it, give them access. You don't want to go in and out of properties and all the time, especially when you start growing your business. You need to have processes in place to where you're not always there. So as you go through it, and especially if you join a mentorship program, you're gonna learn about different things about being a technician and building a business. And technician is always the one who's always out there in the job, and you don't want to do that going forward as you start to grow your business. Fixtures is self-explanatory as far as just fixtures. They're in the house, and you can read through that. Shades and blinds and fire alarms and different things like that in the house. So as investors, it's not something that we're really going to be keen upon, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to end up replacing that stuff. But it's just one of the things that's here. Possession, of course, at closing. Risk of loss. So this is one of the things that sometimes will bite people in the butt, especially the seller. You may have a contract with the seller, and the seller thinks that they're off the hook. They may not have insurance on the house. House burns down. Oh, we have a contract. Oh, they want you to be responsible. So it's one of the things I always tell folks is like, look, you need to make sure you have, and they should, but you will sometimes buy a house that's free and clear, and they may not have insurance on the house. So just be aware and make sure they're aware that they have to continue to keep insurance on the house. If they don't have insurance on the house, and they need to get it, because you do not want to be liable, and you're not going to be liable because you're not the owner, right? But a lot of times they don't understand that and not aware of that. I had that happen to me to a house over in Worthdale, where something happened in the house, and of course they thought that I was going to be responsible, and not going to happen. We just have a contract. I'm not the owner of the property. Assignments, of course, this can be assigned. Like I said, I use this contract here, and this was always my contract that I signed, because number one, it's 2 pages. It's quick and easy. Be signed, even though I like Kathy's, but yeah, I use this contract, and then I also have a separate assignment contract that I use also that details things a little bit more in a separate assignment contract. And of course, parties that are involved. So buyer and seller, I will give you an example right now of what I'm going through on a property right now in Holly Springs. So I have a property that's under contract right now in Holly Springs as myself as the buyer and the seller. And I think I was telling Kathy about this a little while ago. The seller died on me doing this process right now, and it says it's selling their heirs, and the property rolled over to the heirs. But guess what? I can't close on it now because they had to hire a power of attorney, which is an attorney, and now it's in the courthouse. And guess the process we got to go through now? All the probate crap. So just be aware that you could have a contract and you may not close as quickly as you think you're going to close. I'm going through this right now on the property in Holly Springs. So it's thought I was going to be able to have this thing ready, for April or May, but that's not going to happen.
A couple
And of course,
questions
some other
for
things,
you.
survival. Say again?
You got a couple questions for you.
Okay. All right.
If the market is a seller's market and the competition is tough, you sometimes make a decision to pay for closing costs to sweeten the deal. Oh, she's answering someone else's question. Never mind.
Gotcha.
Lionel, can you add your assignment contract in the email as well?
Yep, I will.
All right. So if someone had asked why you stopped paying closing fees, and that person was answering it, not asking a question, they answered it very well too. So that's good. And then is there a period of time between transferring the deed from seller to buyer that there's a gap in insurance? It better not be.
Yeah, that's strike from the attorney right there, right?
All right, Tip, you ready? You have to stop your share there. Oh, wait, you were done, right, Lionel?
Yep, I'm gonna stop it here.
Hey, everybody, how you doing? All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great.
All right, good. So the standard realtor contract is a joint creation of the North Carolina Association of Realtors and the NC Bar Association. They get together, they have a forms committee that gets together every year to discuss changes to our forms, and every July, usually July 1st, they release the new forms and updated forms. Sometimes, like this spring, when the COVID thing started happening, they'll change some things around and put it out as an emergency amendment to things. Like we had a COVID-19 addendum created earlier this year or earlier last year that helped people get through situations where one party or the other had potentially a delay in closing due to COVID. Let's say if someone got COVID during the transaction, everybody kind of agreed to keep it moving along as needed. All right, so let me go in here and share my screen and pull up the form. Bear with me, I'm gonna pull it up first before I share the screen. Well, I can just pull this one up for now. Now I'll share screen again. Share. All right, can you guys see that? Do you guys see the purchase contract there?
It's up, it's there, we see it.
All right, way to go. All right, I think I'll just go with this. So I'm gonna show you something else real quick. We realtors have a lot of addendums and forms at our disposal. And we have this software that you see me pulling up right now called Zip Forms, and that's where all of our forms are. And you have to be a member of the board to get this. So not only do we have, I've got to move this somewhere. There we go. So we have all of these forms right here, and you can just see over to the right of my screen. There we go. I'm gonna move everybody here. Look at all these forms and addendums. Holy cow, that's a lot of stuff. They got a form for just about everything. All right, but the main thing we're here today to talk about is the purchase agreement. Let me move this here and go back to there. I'm gonna keep that open so I have it. See, ours has a place where we can fill in the blanks. It's a fillable document, and then we can save it, send it, print it, whatever we need to do. All right, now I'm gonna go back to the PDF version. All right, so a lot of what's in Lionel's copy is the intent. A lot of the clauses that he's got in his document are found here in this purchase agreement. But as I was looking at what he had shared with us versus what we see in the realtor world, yeah, there have been some things that were modified to benefit he or himself or the seller or whoever was creating the document. And there's nothing wrong with that, and buyers should certainly seek their own representation or know what they're doing, just like any other investment purchase. They need to know what they're getting into. So a lot of the first page two, let me see, one, two, most of the first 3 pages are section 1, terms and definitions. So let's leave it to the realtors and the lawyers to really muck things up and give you a whole bunch of legalese that could have been simplified on Kathy's 1-page document. We love to kill trees in our world. So quite clear as we scroll through this document, terms and conditions, buyer, seller, property address, legal descriptions, and then we get into the basic terms, the price, due diligence fee, if that's applicable, earnest money, additional earnest money if applicable, loan assumptions, seller financing, building deposit. They've really kind of made this a one-size-fits-all form, and then depending on what your transaction is and what you need, other addendums might apply. Like if you're doing a loan assumption, you're going to need that form. If you're doing new construction, you're going to need that form to go with this. If you're doing seller financing, you're going to need that form as well. So depending on the transaction will determine what other forms you'll need. That's all that you see on page 1. So you're identifying buyer, seller, you're identifying the property, and you're identifying the money, the terms. Go to the second page, we're talking about what the earnest money deposit is and who's going to hold it. That's generally going to be your closing attorney or the listing firm. If the listing firm still holds earnest money, a lot of them don't anymore. I know we don't. Then we go further down, the effective date. Effective date of a contract is the date the buyers and the sellers have signed. The last one is signed. Once everybody is signed and that communication has been conveyed to all parties, you have a contract. You're in, you got a deal. And as competitive as the market is, that's an important detail. We've seen deals that got people thought they had a verbal and that was binding. It's not binding because, you know, what if an offer comes in the 11th hour and it's a better deal than what you thought you had? The seller might take that deal and sign it instead. So you want to get all the signatures buttoned up as quickly as you can. That's very important in our world anyway. You see this blue box here where it says note. Throughout the realtor contract, you'll find these sections that are kind of highlighted in that fashion. And these simply are things that the forms committee wanted us to pay close attention to. And this particular one, this goes over the earnest money deposit and what they do in the event of a dispute. Why would you have a dispute of the earnest money? Because someone didn't close. So if someone didn't close, like the buyer terminated the deal or the seller terminated the deal because the buyer didn't close within a certain time frame, we have earnest money sitting in someone's trust account that has to be accounted for and dispersed in some manner. And sometimes the parties can't agree depending on the circumstances. So this little box tells the parties what happens if they can't obtain an agreement. The effective date, this is section 1G. This is, that's the date that everybody or the last person signed. So that's when your contract is valid. And then we're getting into the due diligence period. Due diligence period, also known as an inspection period per se, sometimes referred to as that. In the realtor world, in the traditional selling world, in North Carolina, the due diligence period encompasses all of the potential contingencies. Back many years ago, we used to have contingencies for appraisal, contingency for repairs, contingency for financing. Well, they eliminated all of that, and we just have that due diligence fee. So you've heard that term due diligence fee, and those fees are going up and up and up. You're paying a seller with that fee to basically take the house off the market so that you, the buyer, have the opportunity to inspect, make sure your loan is going smooth and that sort of thing. So section 1J here, the due diligence period, that's when the due diligence period ends. And when that due diligence period ends, the buyer does not really have a claim to their earnest money anymore. As a term that is often used, earnest money goes hard. So it's non-refundable. Of course, all of your deposits credit to closing. And I know I'm probably going very fast for a lot of you, and that's okay. We'll be able to answer questions. There's quite a bit in this 15-page document. You know, they spend 30 hours in post-licensing going over contracts and closing. So this can get really crazy and in-depth. This is basically your Cliff Notes Contracts 101 session here. Settlement date is what we typically refer to as closing. You know, we're going to get into a legal term here. Closing is actually when the deed's recorded by definition. So settlement is when we have our ink party and everybody signing documents. They are not one and the same thing. So settlement date is what you refer to as closing date. You see that on page 2. And we'll get into something else about delays in settlement in a moment. There's actually a place where we address that. And see, there's our box. See paragraph 12 for delay in settlement and closing. We'll be getting to that in a minute. So there's there are provisions where parties can delay closing. We'll get to that. And here we go. There's the definition of closing. This is when the deed's recorded, the money is dispersed, et cetera, proceeds of the sale. Okay, then we have another big red box here that the state bar has determined that a lot of performance of acts and services requiring an attorney for a closing should be performed by an attorney that is licensed to practice law. So basically it's their warning that use an attorney for settlement and closing. Probably a very good idea. Trying to close stuff on your own is probably not very smart. Assessments. Lionel touched on assessments. Yes, HOAs, be aware of assessments. Be aware of, especially with townhome communities. He was so right. Roof budgets, amenities like swimming pool work, things like that. But one thing, some of you are probably working out of Fayetteville. I know we are working the Fayetteville market. There's a lot of areas of Fayetteville that are getting annexed in. So we see assessments down there pretty often for water and sewer hookups to PWC, which is their local electric and water and sewer utility. So be aware of assessments, ask as many questions as you can with your sellers, and make sure that your sellers don't owe money that they didn't know about. Of course, that usually comes up in title search too. Assessments will usually come up during that process. So we define proposed and special confirmed assessments, proposed and confirmed. We will get to that in more detail in a minute, but as you can see, the definitions. Proposed is that it's under consideration, like the HOA is talking about something. Confirmed means it's owed. It's like a lien. There is a difference, and who pays for it. We'll get to that in a moment. Fixtures and exclusions. All right, we are going to go to page 4, and here's another one of those red boxes. So the party should not assume that an item will or will not be included in the sale based on an oral or written agreement that is not part of the contract. So yeah, we've seen all kinds of disputes, like people taking mirrors off the wall, like in bathrooms, TV mounts, hot tubs being removed, all sorts of things. And we're going to get to this list that they provide here on page 4. In our world, and probably in most investment world, if it's attached to the house, it's a fixture. If it's attached, it stays. Well, because we had so many disputes that came up, they literally went and spelled this out. And look at the list here under section B here, specified items. These are all things that are fixtures. These are fixtures in the realtor world. Garage door openers, for example, even though that's just something that can be held in your hand and moved around, they are now considered fixtures. Ceiling fans, light fixtures, antennas, basketball goals, fuel tanks, thermostats, window blinds, shades, all of this stuff. So when you're dealing in our world, make sure you look at this list and make sure you're not taking something out of the house that you're not supposed to take out of the house. We've seen it. We've seen it all. And this is a new clause here, number C. Many sellers now and homeowners now have stuff that's tied to their phones, like their thermostats, alarm systems, things that would be fixtures. So now we have a clause here that says the seller needs to unpair those things from their devices so that the new buyers can hook up to those things and use them as they expected. Happens a lot. And it's usually nothing that a seller has done intentionally. They just forgot. So we have to remind them, hey, disconnect your phone from the alarm, disconnect your phone from the thermostat. So we have to remind them. All right, now we're going to get into a section that talks a little bit more about fixtures and personal property. So now we're getting this items that are leased or not owned. So we want to identify, as they say here, fuel tanks, antennas, satellite dishes, receivers, appliances or alarm systems, anything that's leased. Like satellite TV stuff is the most common thing, and alarm systems are a very common thing. Oil tanks, those things that they listed in that sentence, they're the most commonly found things that are leased, and we need to identify those so a buyer doesn't think that they're staying with the house. Section E here, items that don't convey. This is the seller's opportunity to say, I'm taking the kitchen chandelier or light fixture. I'm taking the ceiling fan in the secondary bedroom. I'm taking the basketball goal with me. If your seller has the intention of not leaving a fixture, that's where they need to put it. Otherwise, it's assumed that it is staying in the house. Personal property. This is where we list things that aren't fixtures. This is where your appliances go. Refrigerator, washer, dryer. I go so far as to list all of the appliances in a property so that there's no ambiguity. We'll generally write something in the appliances that were at the home at the showing on such and such date. Why do I do that? Because we've seen people go in and switch the appliances out between contract and closing. So we want to make sure that all parties understand what it is we're expecting to be in the house when we do our final walkthrough. We see other cases where people are leaving other personal property or negotiating that in the deal, like lawnmowers, gardening equipment, pool equipment, things like that. This is where you have to kind of ask for guidance from your lender, because sometimes the lender won't want to see anything in there other than appliances or things that would commonly be part of a home sale. The reason for that is in the financing world, they'll consider excess personal property to be an inducement to purchase. I guess in the last real estate crash, or prior to that, there were a lot of properties that changed hands that included things like cars. Buy this house and get my BMW, that kind of thing. And that went on, that really happened. And when those loans started unraveling in the last crash, the bank said, okay, yeah, no more of that. Let's keep it clean. No more, buy my house and get 5 years of golf membership free. None of that stuff. We usually will have to transfer things that they don't want to see onto a bill of sale, a separate bill of sale with either negotiated with money or just it comes with the house at no added value is what we call that. And then here's another one of those boxes. Any personal property that will be a part of the sale should be identified in the paragraph. Don't assume. All right, and now we go to the buyer's due diligence process, where it's advising the buyer to conduct their due diligence right here prior to the expiration of the due diligence period, and that the seller is not obligated to grant an extension. The buyer can terminate any time up to due diligence for any reason. And if the buyer does terminate, they are entitled to receive their earnest money back. Once 5 p.m. on the due diligence expiration hits, they're all in. The earnest money is hard, like I said before. This goes into what a buyer is supposed to be doing in their due diligence process. They're supposed to be working on loan. They're supposed to be doing investigation on the property, inspections, reviewing the covenants. That's a big thing we get into a lot is, people, they want to know what can they or do or not do, especially when they're working from home now. What kind of business activities can they conduct at home? Can they have their work van in the driveway? Can they put up fencing as they want to? Can they have chickens? Can they have other farm animals other than dogs and cats? And believe it or not, these things are usually specified in the covenants. So know what your buyer is expecting to do with the property and check it out. Help them find the answers. Can you get insurance on the property? The buyer is going to get appraisals, surveys, looking into zoning if applicable. Is it in a flood zone? Can they get all of their utilities? What is the road maintenance? That's a big one, especially buyers that are using government-backed financing. We need to know that this dirt road has a maintenance agreement, or this gravel road leads back to the house off the main highway has a maintenance agreement. That could be a loan killer for some transactions.
Or that you have a right to use it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you have an easement to get to your house?
Some people
and
think
Kathy
because
could
there's a
probably answer
road
this.
there, you automatically have a right to use it, and that is not true.
Yeah, but my understanding is you really can't landlock anyone either. But of course, it gets messy. So if there's not
There's a
something
question for you,
defined-
Tip, from April Williams. Are you required to send notification to seller in writing that you are backing out of the contract, and why? If after due diligence?
the why, no. If after due diligence, not really. If the buyer wants to back out of a contract after the due diligence period is up, they just need to know they're going to lose some money. Now, if they're backing out because of
before due diligence ends. Sorry,
before due diligence ends, no, you can have a bad hair day and get out of the deal. You just send the right form. I mean, you wait. We've had this happen. You think we've seen it all. So we've had people literally say, I've thought about this and I just don't want to live there anymore. What do you mean?
There is as a form, so it is done in writing.
It is done in writing. We do give the other agent a heads up, say,
right,
look,
Mike,
they're backing out, but we have to get it in writing. Yes.
Okay. Mike Wall is asking, if I'm a broker and also do wholesale deals, am I required to use the standard realtor contract if I'm buying?
Hi, Mike. Mike, you're still at Northside, right? I thought it was a Northside agent. I don't think you're really required to, but you probably need to talk to your broker in charge, because that's going to vary from firm to firm. Some are going to really frown on activities outside of the normal realtor paradigm. Some don't really care as long as you don't break the law. But as a licensee, you're kind of held to different. If you ever got a complaint and it was something that was outside of the normal broker world, you better get a good lawyer to answer your complaint, because as a licensee, my understanding is you're kind of held to a different standard than anybody else that they deal with.
That is
And
correct.
if you don't like that and you don't want to be up to that scrutiny, then give up your license. And I know
Mike
people
Wall says he's about to become a realtor. He's not one now, so.
Okay, I thought his name was familiar, and I thought it was connected with Northside, but
Now,
yeah.
one
So
more
Mike,
before you go on, April Williams, it's my understanding disclosure statements are required in North Carolina from the seller. Is it the wholesaler is responsible to acquire that disclosure statement, or the end buyer?
it's wholesalers, no,
Yeah.
they can do whatever they want.
Right,
I guess. So I think the statute says a seller is supposed to provide a disclosure to prospective buyers. Is that seller the person that the wholesaler is buying it from, or is it the person that the wholesaler themselves? Well, that's a good question. And is an investor to investor transaction exempted in the statute? It may be.
It may be, and even if it's not, a lot of investor to investors don't care. And so
They don't.
even though if that is the statute, if you have a buyer and a seller who neither care, it's loosey-goosey.
We're gonna get to the part of the standard contract where this comes up, but while it is a general statute requirement, the parties can agree to not care.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
proceed with the transaction. In other words, it doesn't, because there was not one provided, does not keep you from closing on the deal. I've got it. a buyer that we have under contract purchasing a wholesaler's property tomorrow, there was no disclosures.
Yeah.
He didn't care. They're going to gut the house anyway. They just want to get their hands on it. They could care
Exactly.
less.
Very often with investors, you won't have them. That's all I have for now, Tip.
All right, cool.
Hey,
Keep
Tip,
coming.
Hey,
Buyers
Tip.
also need to, whatever the fuel tanks are on the property, propane tanks for fireplaces or for heat, oil heat. There's, the buyers need to be looking into that. Sale or lease of existing property. Yes, if you need to sell another property to close on the one you're making an offer on, you need to let everybody know. We don't have contingent sale addendums anymore. They took those away about a year ago. The market got so crazy, and with limited inventory, there were so many disputes that came up, and the real estate commission got tired of the complaints resulting from those contingent sales that they got the forms committee to just get rid of contingent sale addendums. But that doesn't mean you can't negotiate a deal needing to sell to buy. In practicality, how do we do that without a contingent addendum? You have to have a longer closing date and maybe a longer due diligence period if you can negotiate that. We're in one right now where that's the case, where we negotiated a 90-day closing timeline and a normal due diligence period. So we get like 3 weeks for inspections and loan stuff, and then we just got to wait on the other house to close so we can close on the new one. You just have to buy enough time to complete the transactions. Repair negotiations, Section D. Lionel brought this up before, as is, right? See in the capital letters, this property is being sold in its current condition. Unless you've negotiated something otherwise, it's as is at the time of closing. End of story. We have a form that we use for requesting repairs when after inspections, when we want to ask the seller for stuff. And then you see here, we got another block here about negotiated repairs and improvements. We'll get to that as well. The buyer's obligation to repair damage. If you're in the house doing inspections and you break it, you got to fix it. That's pretty much what that's saying. And you've got to indemnify the seller from any accidents while you're at the house doing inspections. So if you're at the house with the home inspector and you fell off a ladder, don't sue the seller for that. They've already gotten hold harmless right here. That's on you. And then here we go. Here's your right to terminate for any reason or no reason right there. You wake up one day and you don't like the house, you don't like the neighborhood, whatever, doesn't matter. You send written notice of termination during the due diligence period. And buyer timely delivers a termination notice, the contract is terminated, and earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. There are circumstances where we might not see the seller's signature. That's a problem for the escrow agent. The escrow agent can't release the funds unless all parties sign. But once the buyer terminates, that's it, they're out. The seller can put the house back up on the market. Don't need both signatures to be terminated, just the one. Need both signatures to release the earnest money. All right, buyer representations. This is where we tell a seller what kind of financing is involved or not. So does or does not need to obtain a loan. So if it's a cash buyer, you check does not. You don't fill out anything else. Buyer does get a loan, you fill that out, put down as many details as you can. Your contracts are not specified on financing. It's not contingent on financing. This is a representation. So financing is part of due diligence, just like everything else. So if you got loan problems, you better figure them out during your due diligence period. If the loan problem happens after due diligence, that's not the seller's problem, that's the buyer's problem. Like buyers that go out and purchase cars 3 days before closing, or washers and dryers, and having their credit run and taking on loans. And we've seen all of this, even though we tell people not to do it. And the loan officers do a great job usually telling people, don't let anybody pull your credit. But we can't fix stupid. It happens. People get ideas in their head. They just could not pass up that Labor Day sale, and now they're homeless. We've had people that have been able to fix this stuff after they've gotten themselves in a jam, but sometimes they can't. That's it. Game over. It happens. Okay, and here we go in this box. The buyer's obligations under this contract are not conditioned upon obtaining or closing any loan. So, you know, it's up to the buyer to make it happen. And if the buyer does not intend to obtain a loan, the seller is advised to obtain documentation that the buyer can close. Of course. So if you make an offer, the seller wants to know, do you have proof? Give me proof of funds. Prove to me you can close. You're getting a loan. How are you doing this? Well, yeah, it's prudent to ask the other side that's making the offer, how are we getting to closing? How are they getting there? And the buyer's obligated to provide something, or the seller may not accept the offer and sign the deal. Simple as that. Usually not much of an issue. Usually we don't have too much problem with that anyway. And here's another place where you mark down, does the buyer have to sell or lease other property to qualify for the loan? And this is where we put the information in where they are needing to sell to close on this house. So this kind of took the place, this section right here took the place of the contingent addendum in a sense. But like I said, the contract's not contingent on another sale. So you have to figure out that, you know, how much time do you need to make all that happen? And some more representations here for the buyer. To the best of the buyer's knowledge, there's no circumstances that would prohibit them from closing on the deal. Simple statement. And here's where we were talking about the seller disclosure statement right here. Have you received a copy? You check the first box. If you've not received a copy, you check the second box, and the buyer has the right to terminate without penalty at the end of the third calendar day. All right, so they have 3 days to give it to you. If they don't, buyer can terminate if they want to. They can keep going forward. They're not required to have one. And then there are cases that are exempt. Same with the mineral oil and gas rights disclosure. That's one that came up about half dozen years ago as a result of some lawsuits. I'm not even going to go into all the details, but basically we want to make sure that the subsurface rights to the property have not been tampered with. Came up mainly because of fracking. So someone sold the subsurface rights before they built houses on the land, and all hell broke loose. So we got to, I think it was Lionel that said before, every time there's a conflict, another form's created or another page of the contract. Well, that was what caused this. Let's keep going here. Okay, so and then in the box down here, talk to an attorney if it appears that the mineral oil or gas rights have been severed or is going to be severed. Yeah, that would be time to talk to an attorney. Find out why is this happening? What does that mean for you and what you expect to use the property for? All right, now we're going to go into assessments. We talked about this before. Lionel talked about it a little bit. So the proposed assessments, these are when the HOA, for example, is talking about doing something. They haven't voted to do something like new roofs for everybody, or a municipality is talking about annexing a neighborhood, but they haven't done it. They just started talking about it. That's a proposed assessment. Buyers are purchasing subject to proposed assessments. And then the buyer would be responsible for all of the costs therein. We'll get to the confirmed ones here shortly. Buyers are also responsible for their closing costs, to include HOA fees, like upfront HOA fees, like working capital is a common one. The appraisal fees, title searches, title insurance, closing attorney fees, deed recording, and then of course their loan fees. Buyers responsible for their costs. And as you saw in Kathy's and Lionel's versions, everybody was responsible for their own costs unless negotiated otherwise. And that's the same in our world. Everybody's responsible for their own costs and fees unless you negotiate otherwise. This blanket authorization, section C, is often ignored by closing attorneys. Basically, the buyer has already authorizing the lender and buyer's lender to copies of the settlement statement and disbursement summaries. And we sometimes have difficulty getting information from the lenders and the other side of a transaction, because we want to verify, for example, that the earnest money was credited to the buyer. This is kind of a blanket authorization that we're allowed to have that information, but even still, some closing attorneys will say, that's private, you can't see the buyer's stuff. Okay, fine. We have ways around that. I don't get an argument over things like that with the closing attorney. Now we're gonna get to the seller's representations. And again, I'm sorry if I'm going too fast, stop me, throw Kathy some questions. Section 7A, we want to know how long has a seller owned the property, and like a wholesaler would check the third box, does not yet own the property. An investor might check the middle box, owned it less than a year, might be a quick flip. In most cases, it's the first box. Someone's owned the property for at least a year. Then you have the lead paint box. If it's built before 78, we got to include a lead paint addendum. And then here we go to the confirmed assessments again, proposed and confirmed assessments. This is where a seller identifies or states that there are or aren't any assessments. I will tell you, this is this section 7C, is something that we have lots of problems with, and the North Carolina board did put out a memo in November about this, is that it's often misused. We see a lot of agents, buyer's agents, that will check or not, the second box, and then write in under this identify section, if any, comma, seller to pay. And honestly, that just has to stop. And the state guidance was it needs to stop, because it puts the seller on the hook for things after closing that they shouldn't be on the hook for. And my point has always been a buyer and buyer's agent should be making any representations for my seller. If anyone needs to fill out anything in section 7C, it's the listing agent and or the seller. So I have to educate agents all the time about this, and then they go talk to their broker in charge, and then they shut up because they were wrong. All right, and it goes into the section 6A and 8K here in this block are referenced as talking about assessments. And we already covered 6A. We're getting to 8K soon. Sellers responsible for providing information about their HOA if there is one. All of these things should be provided. This is where also the agents would put in the contact information and the dues amounts for the HOA. Keep going. Seller obligations. Seller has to provide clear title, provide a deed, help the closing attorney get a payoff statement, and provide information if they're not a U.S. resident. There's additional forms that they will have to fill out. If they're not a citizen, they may have to pay some tax at closing. They have to cooperate with this stuff. And again, here's another authorization. This authorizes the seller, authorizes the buyer to get information from them too. Again, we have these blanket authorizations that people can share information about the transaction with each other. Sometimes, though, a closing attorney will basically block the seller side from seeing the buyer side. I get it. We just all have to tap dance around those things when they come up and get everybody to cooperate and get what they need. Seller is going to provide reasonable access to a buyer for inspections and stuff. So that's very important. Buyers got to conduct their due diligence, and if a seller is blocking them from getting into the house, that's a problem. That could be construed as a default. So, but it comes up sometimes, but not usually in the listed property world that we work in. Usually not much of a problem. You give the other side a heads up, hey, we're going to do a walkthrough on Thursday, and we schedule it in the system, the seller approves it, and that's it. But sometimes maybe like if the property's rented and there's a tenant in there, that could be problematic. If there's work going on in the property, that could be problematic. But again, the seller's got to give the buyer reasonable access to conduct the inspections that they need. Warning, paragraph 4. Oh yeah. So buyers have the right to terminate the contract following the expiration of the due diligence period if the seller's in default. Simple as that. So if you're a seller, just cooperate. Stay cooperative till the end, till you get your money. Seller states in Section D that they're going to get all their stuff out of the house. However, in the investor world, we often close on transactions where you're going to need a dumpster to haul out a bunch of junk. Yeah, that's going to happen. Should that stop you from closing? No. Figure it out. Find a way to make it work. But we've had, in the traditional buyer, seller, owner occupied transactions, yeah, every now and then you get, a buyer who's a little pissy because they left some trash in this room or whatever. Again, work it out. Work it out. That's a silly reason to cancel a deal. Affidavit and indemnification agreement. I'm not sure if this comes up much in the wholesale world, but I guess it does when you're generating your deed paperwork and things. You are generally needing to provide for title insurance purposes an affidavit that any work that's been done on the property in the last 120 days has been paid for or going to be paid for at closing. They call that a lien affidavit, right, Kathy?
Yep.
And that's something that the closing attorney will, whoever's preparing the deed for the seller will usually include that form with that.
Yep.
Along with that as well, designation of lien agents. Those of you that are flipping houses, this comes up a lot. If there's been significant work going on a property, a flip that you're doing, the closing attorney and their title insurer may require that you get lien satisfactions from all of the parties that did do work on the property. And let me tell you, if you contracted all of this out yourself, that's a monster sometimes. So be aware that if the work's been in the last 120 days and it was a significant amount of work, you may have to get everybody that did said work some kind of a lien release that they were paid and they have no claim to the property. So remember that, home flippers, remember that. Good title. Buyers or sellers got to deliver good title, a general warranty deed with no liens at closing, at least no liens after the liens are paid at closing. And here's 2 more blocks that the commission gave us. Buyer's failure to conduct a survey or examine title prior to the expiration of due diligence period does not relieve the seller of their obligation to deliver good title. Just because we're past due diligence doesn't mean that the seller doesn't have to fix problems with regards to surveys or liens. They have to deliver clear title. Survey is probably the thing that comes up the most in this case, because so often the surveys don't come back until after due diligence is up. And that, if there's a fence encroachment, is the most common thing we see. Fence encroachment comes up and we got to figure it out, figure out, does the buyer care? How much do they care? And what are our options? Sometimes it's a simple encroachment agreement. If all the parties, if the neighbors are all friendly, it's a simple encroachment agreement and call it a day. Sometimes you got to move a fence. That's a pain in the butt, but it happens. Next note here they gave, if it's a short sale, hold up. Hold up and make sure you're using the right forms and the right procedure to do a short sale. That's kind of, as Kathy knows, that's one of my areas of expertise. We're not seeing too many of those right now since the market's pacing higher, but pendulums swing 2 ways, and someday the market will turn the other way and you'll have folks that are upside down, and that's when short sales come into play. It's coming. Someday it's coming. The day of reckoning.
It always comes back around.
Always comes back around. All right, the next section of this document here, this is where you identify who the deed's going to be made payable to. Are they unmarried, married? Are they, yeah, you can put all that in there and make sure the closing attorney have a conversation with them as to how they want to take title. Next section is where we put in closing costs to be paid by seller if that's negotiated. We're seeing less and less of that right now, as Lionel mentioned earlier. The market's too hot for sellers to be paying closing costs for buyers. At this point, it's not a matter of what you can negotiate in our world. It's a matter of how high are you willing to pay. We're operating in a world of multiple offers and properties selling over list. It's totally unacceptable to have a seller paying closing costs when that's going on. But from time to time, we do have closing costs paid. A lot of times where we see closing costs paid between a buyer and seller in our world is after inspections. So the buyer and the seller negotiate cash in lieu of repairs. So the buyer gives inspection report and a list to the listing agent and seller. Seller says, I really don't feel like doing any work. How about I give you $1,000 or $2,000 and you just deal with it after closing? Great. What happens from there is that will get transferred to a contract amendment form, which is 4T in our forms group. And the lender, if it's a property that's getting a loan, the lender will usually use that to offset closing costs. Basically, a buyer is not generally going to walk away from closing with cash unless it's cash they put in from deposits. Okay, what do we got here? VA and FHA addendum, then that box. VA and FHA loans, there are certain expenses, and this is something for all investors to know. If you're selling to VA or FHA buyers, there may be certain inspections that, regardless of what's in section I here, that the seller has to pay. I'll give you a good example on a VA loan: the termite inspection, a septic inspection, water quality test. Those things specifically cannot be paid by the veteran. They will be paid by somebody else. Usually the seller or one of the agents are going to have to pony that up. That's what they're talking about in this box right here. Owners association fees, the seller's obviously going to pay any unpaid fees, and they're going to pay the cost to transfer the account from the seller to the new buyer. That's usually not much, about $100, $150 most of the time. And here we go, payment of confirmed special assessments. We've gone into a lot about assessments tonight. If a property has been annexed by a municipality or the HOA voted to assess the homeowners for a certain repair or modification on the property, that's a confirmed assessment and the seller must pay at closing. Late listing penalties, God, I've never seen that come up, but it's still here in our contract. Negotiated repairs. This one sentence causes so many disagreements at times. Negotiated repairs and improvements shall be made in a good and workmanlike manner, and buyer shall have the right to verify same prior to settlement. My goodness, that one sentence causes us a lot of headache because who did the work? Did they do good work? How does it look? Well, we get a lot of disagreements in that regard, and that's why we are often negotiating cash in lieu of repairs. That kind of takes that out of the mix. So we tend to like that. Give them cash, let them fix it to their heart's desire after closing. Seller's breach or failure to comply. This is bad. This is really bad. Section N, if a seller does not comply with everything we've just gone through in the seller's list, if the seller doesn't close or refuses to close, it's bad. The penalties for a seller default aren't good. They should seek counsel. They should come to their senses and figure it out, because they won't win that lawsuit. And I believe there's treble damages on those suckers when they actually get to court. So they want to stay out of court for failure to perform. They just don't, just a bad idea. Bad idea. Prorations, I think these were on the other contracts as well. Things like any rents, if it's a rental property, association dues, taxes, they're prorated between the parties at settlement. Home warranties, I love home warranties. They're common in our world. Buyer asks for a home warranty generally, and seller agrees to pay, and then the buyer has a 1-year home warranty, which helps them out, makes them feel good. We use them all the time. Lionel talked about Section 11, risk of loss. Yeah, if the house burns down in the middle of the deal, the buyer doesn't have to buy it. As simple as that. Yeah, it's on the seller to figure it out. Keep your insurance up to date. All right, delay in settlement. This is a big one here. Clause, section number 12. We call it the delaying party clause. So if a buyer can't meet their closing date, they have up to 14 days to close without penalty. And beyond that, they need to negotiate a contract extension. The seller has the same right to an extent, but they just can't arbitrarily say, I don't feel like closing because I'm getting my hair done. No, they have to have a really, really good reason that they can't perform. And honestly, the seller doesn't have much to sign. This is really more of the buyer's party, settlement is. So, but do realize that we operate in this delaying party clause as a matter of business all the time. We have buyers that miss the closing and we just let it ride for a little while till we figure out what direction it's going in, and then we settle a new closing date. And by moving the closing date, we move this 14-day party clause as well. So every time you change the closing date, you move the 14 days goes with it. There is a box on the contract amendment form where you can limit that delaying party time frame to 4 days instead of 14. And that's generally when, say, the buyer's already been through like 2 delays and the seller's about had it and ready to kick him to the curb. They'll say, yeah, we'll take the extension one more time, but get a mark the 4-day box for us to sign it. That's where we see that come up, and that's not here. That's on the contract amendment form. Possession prior to or after closing. So sometimes a buyer needs to occupy the property prior to closing. Sometimes a seller needs to occupy after closing. We have other forms for those things. So we just work that out. So it happens. Section 14, these are the most commonly used addendums that would accompany a purchase offer in our world. And if they are meant to be part of an offer, you would check the box and you would include that with your offer. This here, identify other party or drafted addenda. That's for attorney drafted stuff. Like if you have special forms you want to include, you have some special terms from one or the other you want to include, that's where that goes. Section 15, we talk about assignments here. In our world, Lionel's world, it just said, in his contract, it said that he has the right to assign the contract whether you like it or not. In our world, all parties have to agree to an assignment. Next up, tax deferred exchanges. This is something that would be relevant to a lot of you. If a buyer or seller is taking advantage of a 1031 exchange, all the parties agree to cooperate. And the parties, section 17, all parties are, and their respective heirs and assigns, it's binding if once they sign. And the survival clause here, if a buyer or seller pass away in the middle of the transaction, the heirs need to complete the transaction. We've had that happen too. And the rest of this is a lot of legalese here. Basically everything's in writing. Notices are conducted between the agents. Execution, there might be multiple copies of the document. Section 22 defines days. We use calendar days, not business days in our world. I think you guys do the same on your other forms. And I think we're getting to the end of it here. Yeah, this is where everybody signs, okay? And if it's an entity buying or selling, they sign at the bottom part here. This is very important here, wire fraud. I don't know how much you guys have talked amongst yourselves about wire fraud, but when you're getting ready to wire funds to the attorney, you should call them to verify the instructions. Even if it's a earnest money deposit. Anytime you're sending a wire, it's just good practice to get whoever you're wiring it to on the phone and confirm whatever was emailed to you. You get any emails beyond that that are saying wire it here, wire it there, red flag, pick up the phone and call. These phishing attempts and scammers have gotten damn good, man. I've seen some really crafty emails wanting you to click here, do this, send your money here, whatever. We've seen it, and we know people that have wired money to the wrong place because they fell for it. So just be cautious, be very
And
careful.
we get a lot of people annoyed with us because we have to send wiring instructions through a security email, and they
Yes.
complain because they have to enter a password, and then they complain because they have to call and verify it. But if you
It's your
send a
protection.
wire, right, and your wire went, to Nigeria somewhere, you'll be happy that we protected you, because wire fraud
Yeah.
is a very big deal right now.
That's not the area to complain. That's the area to just follow the instructions and comply. It's for your own good.
Tip, here's
And
a
as you can
question.
see, they
How are
did a bit.
here's a question. How are assignments handled on the 2T? Does the
Good question.
seller need to sign if the contract is assignable?
Yeah, the assignment would generally be created by one or the other party, and or an attorney, and all would sign it and just say it's assigned, and that's it. I mean, and I've seen all kinds. I've seen 2-page assignments. I've seen 2-paragraph assignments. I've seen 1-paragraph assignments. We don't have a form for that. That's something that we would go to a closing attorney for, or the buyer and seller have one that they use.
And the seller does not need to sign it as long as the contract is assignable, then the seller doesn't have to be involved in that at all.
In our world, they do.
In your world, they do. Okay.
They have to, all parties have to sign and agree to the assignment, but
What you mean, so they have to agree, they have to sign on the actual assignment, or they have to just agree that it's assignable?
they have to agree that it's assignable. I don't think they actually have to sign it.
Yeah, so they don't actually have to sign the agreement. That's what I thought. Okay. Cool. Well, look, you guys, you have any more, here's another one tip. Had a situation with a person that wanted to enter into a purchase contract stating they had 5 relatives with legal right to property. His father used to own it, but was deceased. Some of the heirs were unable to be located, and the seller claimed he was power of attorney over his brother, having legal right to sign the agreement for his brother. I backed out of the situation, but does this happen often? Yes and no. It happens often in the investor world, because a lot of those difficult estates are property that people can buy inexpensively for that very reason, because they're messed up. But all that you just described, if there's a POA, that will be recorded. There's an answer to all that. The closing attorney can work through all that with you. I once worked on 100-some acre assemblage with a huge estate. It took us 2 years to get it done. I went to Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, and had a deed signed in prison. And I went to New York City and had a deed signed. So there are very complicated estates out there. They're not super common, probably in Tip's world, and they're not super common in investor world, but they are more common.
Yes, they are. And we have what's called the additional signatures addendum. So we have more than 2 people that need to sign a contract. We use that to fold them all in. In our world, when we're dealing with a seller and we know it's an estate, or we want to kind of dive into that before we sign the listing agreement and market it on MLS. We don't like surprises later. Surprises come up. Don't get me wrong. Things happen. They conveniently forgot to tell us things. It happens. Okay. But we try to identify, at least I do. I try to identify as much as I can up front. Who's who needs to sign. Are you married? That's a big thing that comes up. Are you married? And then what if you and the hubby have been separated, not legally, for 10 years, and you just never got around to getting the divorce?
And
He's still got to sign.
Your closing attorney, you just say, yeah, I'm divorced. But then when it comes down to it, we find out, well, you might feel like you're divorced because you've been separated for 10 years, but legally you ain't divorced. And guess what? Hubby has to sign.
Yeah. So those are the kind of things that come up. Just got to ask questions. So even you guys, when you're looking to wholesale a deal, or investor to investor transactions, off-market transactions. Ask questions. The question you don't ask is the one that gets you in trouble.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
if a seller's cagey about answering questions, that's your red flag right there. Start poking around more, because that you get yourself in trouble. You might wind up losing money on a deal instead of making a profit. No good. So the rest of our purchase agreement, as you can see in the last couple pages, these are just information sections to put agents' information. And then this last page is where we sign for deposits. So that, again, 15 pages, and I know this was a lot, and I know a lot of it probably went right over your heads, but that's okay. Send us questions. I'm always happy to talk. Give me a
So
ring.
I put up earlier in the chat, I put all Tip's information in there.
Awesome.
You
Great.
guys will have it. I put his website, his name, his phone number, his realty company. If you scroll up in the chat, everyone, you'll find that. And we could put it in again too.
And we're also down in the Fayetteville market and down in Southern Pines, Pinehurst now. It's probably about 40% of our business now down in those areas. So if you guys are doing stuff down in Fayetteville, I know there's a Fayetteville subgroup, we're serving those areas. So.
Yep. So you guys can see the vast differences, and you can have in
Big.
contracts here between that simple little one-page thing and the middle one and Tip's full-blown realtor contract.
I like Kathy's.
Yes, we all like Kathy, but unfortunately, you can't always use it. So you
No.
guys have to just decide, figure out which is going to be the best one for you. Obviously, if you're using this contract, you're going to have a realtor involved. But Lionel is emailing me his contract, and we'll get those out to you. Tip, man, that was just awesome. You are.
I hope I didn't lose you all. I try to. It's so hard to break it all down.
Yeah, it's so much.
There's just so much.
And
crap.
I see some chat stuff here. Victoria, she has a rental in Fayetteville. Wouldn't mind adding more. Absolutely, get in touch with me. I think that's probably the one place that I've seen where you can actually buy properties at cash flow well.
I know, that's good. Tip, if you want to put your information in there again so they don't have to scroll up.
Jermaine Artist says, is North Carolina a community property state? Yes, it is. Yep. Once you say I do, they got half.
Yeah.
Hey,
No matter,
Tip,
if your spouse's name is not on the deed, they still have to sign to sell it because they still own half. If your spouse is not on the loan when you buy the house, they still own half.
Mm-hmm.
hey, Tip,
Yeah.
somebody asked a question earlier. I got a follow-up about the wholesaler being a realtor. So I have a answer from the commission. So
Good.
if you're a
Yeah.
broker-
Please share.
Yeah, if you're a broker and you're wholesaling, it is preferred that you do that under your company instead of your brokers, because like Tip said, your broker charge probably will not allow it, but straight from the commission, you can wholesale, prefer that you do it under your own company instead of actually under your real estate firm. So you'd be doing it as an investor, not a broker.
Do you still have to disclose that you're a licensee though, correct?
So that's a gray area. So
All right.
you should, but you don't have to. As long as you're a party on the contract, you don't have to.
There you go. Kathy just sent the information there again. So there you go. Sorry. And the firm that I work with down in Fayetteville and Southern Pines is RDU Homes for You, which is our licensed team here in Raleigh as well. So depending on where we're working, depends on which firm we're using. And but anyway, if there's any other questions, bring them on and we'll go from there.
Perfect.
Lionel, would you put your contact info in there?
Okay.
And
looks like-
Lionel, so in that case, Lionel, can you use your own contract or do you have to use a standard form? Oh, to follow up on that question you just answered.
Yeah, and I sent you those two contracts to your email, so you should have them.
I'll get that email out. Thanks everyone for hanging in there with us and all that.
Sorry
great-
that took a little long, but 15 pages, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it was
So-
worth
That's a
it,
lot
man.
of stuff.
That was great education. You guys gotta, like Tip said, they take a 30-hour class to teach that to realtors. So
Yeah.
you're just gonna take
And we
valuable
do it in 45 minutes. Yeah.
Yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
All right.
Way to go.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone, for being here. We'll see you next meeting. Tip, thank you as always. A pleasure
Thank
to
you.
see you.
Good night.
Guys,
Stay
have a good night,
safe.
everyone.
Have a good night. Happy
Bye.
selling.
Remember, you can't win this go round.
No cheaty.
Be on time next time and pay attention.
And turn your camera on.
You can get a sneak peek though to know if you're on there for next time.
That's cheating too. Mhm. Oh my goodness. Okay. All righty.
All right.
Man, that was a long one. Good,
Yes, it
really good
was.
participation though.
Yeah, it was good. It got a little complicated, but he kept the people there and only a few left. And a couple texted and said it's because they had something to do. So
Yeah. Well, you know for a fact. Oh,